Hello and welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk about story creation. If you have any suggestions or comments, please email them to releasingyourinnerdragon@gmail.com. Your hosts are Maxwell Alexander Drake, who, in addition to teaching creative writing around the world, is an award-winning novelist and former lead fiction writer for Sony's EverQuest Next. He's also written for other game properties like Shadowrun, written comic books, stage plays, musicals, sold movie scripts, and is currently producing an animated TV show that he's written and directed titled Guards. And Marie Mullaney, author of Songwheel Chronicles and YouTuber of the fantasy world-building channel Just in Time Worlds. We hope you enjoy this episode.
But on the other note, you brought this up. I do have banned word lists.
Oh yeah?
Where I have 50, 60, 70 words in every single IP that I create where I'm not going to use these words. So you brought up the fact that I don't use hours, minutes, or seconds.
Yes.
And it's because the clock was never invented in my world. But understand, this causes some weird things because we're used to saying, hey, just hold on a second and I'll be right there.
I know, right? And you read that in a fantasy book and I go, and when exactly did they invent a pendulum clock in your world?
Now, some of them do. I mean, in Dungeons and Dragons, you have pendulum clocks.
Sure.
So, and it's an old device. It's not like it was invented in the 1900s. It was invented hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Absolutely. So you absolutely could have that.
You could.
And maybe only the wealthy, because that's what it was back in the day. Only the wealthy, only the city would own one or whatever. So you can have that and you can incorporate that or whatever, because it does cause some things where it's like, because if you don't use those, what do you use for? And you know, the moment lasted only a second and then it was gone. Like how do I write that and do it? For me,
have you come across that in my book yet? With my time thing?
No, not yet.
Because I use a candle. I use a time candle. So every time I want to use moment, I say flicker, a flicker of the flame.
Beautiful. That is awesome. That is literally, so I wasn't as clever. I tend to use moment. Yeah. It lasted only a moment and then it was gone. But yeah, you have, like, that's the beauty of this. If you just spend time thinking about this, you know, I thought about the words I didn't want to use. You went a step further and went, okay, but what do they use for time? Yeah. And so now you have these time candles, and that's brilliant.
Even in the prologue where the guy is dying or he's being chased by the boar, and he says he wants to stretch the wick of his candle enough for the hunt to catch up. I
do remember that line.
Yeah, so it just didn't impact me. Yeah, it wouldn't impact you there because you've not yet met a candle, right? But it's all of those expressions relate back to them tracking time on this time candle thing. I think like in chapter 4 odd, I actually described the time candle, which then, you know.
And I'm still, unfortunately, just, this has been a crazy time, but I'm just finished chapter 3. No, I mean, I'm invested in the book, so I'm going to finish.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's like what I did was I went, I've got a time candle, and then I invented in my glossary, there's like a section this long of time expressions.
And that's great world building, and that's spending the time, and it's not, and again, these, in my opinion, are the things that make me giddy as a fan. That's, you know, again, why I started reading your book, and it'll be one of the very first, I may change that. I think if I finish your book, it will be the first self-published book that I've ever finished.
Wow.
I'm trying to think if there is any other one that I've ever gotten through, and I don't. Technically there is one, but it sold 20 million copies.
Well, see that yeah, I mean,
so, or 10 million copies, or how many ever it sold, but it was The Shack. Technically The Shack is a self-published book.
Sure.
And I did read that all the way to the end. And then hated the ending because I felt like he was doing such a great job with the story and what he wanted to do, and I feel like he ended it off of the pressure of everyone else telling him, you can't end it that way, you have to do this. And so it was this really trite ending, in my opinion, that I don't think came from him. I don't know him. I don't know any of this story. I could be completely wrong on this, but just the way it felt to me, it felt that he was like, I'm going to this ending. And then he probably even wrote that and put it out to his beta readers or whatever. And they were all like, oh, no.
You can't do that.
Well, it's such a heavy religious book that I think that his beta readers and his friends, because he's a religious person, were all very Christian. And so I think it offended them. And it feels that way to me. It feels like the book was going to this ending that I thought was going to be fantastic. And yeah, a little sacrilegious, but in line with where we're going with this book. And then it didn't end there. It ends in this much more Christian friendly way. Huh?
Doesn't it suck when they do that? Like Wonder Woman, the first Wonder, not the second Wonder Woman. The second Wonder Woman was a mess, but the first Wonder Woman left me feeling like that. I was like, they're going to make this amazing story where they're going to say humans don't need a war god. We are plenty evil enough by ourselves. And then suddenly we're turning a right angle and there's the big bad Ares and it ends in a battle and love conquers everything. I was like, really, that was an amazing theme and you just chickened out of it.
Yeah, that was, it was terrible.
Yeah.
I hated the movie was ruined for me because of the third act. The mid-act 2 climax was one of the strongest, best things I've ever seen in my life. When she comes up out of that trench and she's like, no, you aren't just going to sit here and allow people to suffer. Like, it was so amazing and so awesome. And then to have it in, so this is off topic, but this, when you bring me down these paths, I feel like I have to finish. Here's my problem and why DC sucks to me. And this is my personal fan opinion. Not that they suck. They suck to me, and why Marvel always does better. And it comes down to one very simple writing concept. In DC, they focus on the power. Look at the power of Superman. How awesome is this power? Wouldn't you love to have this power? In Marvel, they focus on the humanity. Spider-Man is not this amazing superhero. He's a kid trying to find his way in the world and trying to figure stuff out and making all these human mistakes, just like I make, who also happens to have all these, great superpowers. So the problem with Wonder Woman could have been the best DC movie ever made. It could have been.
It could have been.
Because it was for 2 acts.
Yes.
For 75% of the movie, it was absolutely the best DC movie.
It was amazing.
Because it was all about Diana's humanity. It was all about her flaws. It was all about the thematic elements that make stories amazing. And then Act 3 came and they went, oh yeah, she's also a god. Did we tell you she was a god? Look at how god she is. Look at her. She's fighting another god. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? Wouldn't you love to be a god with all these god powers and fight another god with other god powers? Look at god powers. Aren't the god powers great? Isn't this an amazing movie showing all these god powers fighting other god powers? Aren't you so satisfied as a fan watching these god powers fight god powers? Isn't that amazing? God powers? God powers. And it's like, no, it's not. And it's now not the best DC movie ever made. Like,
well, I have to tell you, speaking of Superman, you really should watch Lois and Clark on HBO at the moment, TV series. I don't normally like Superman. Too many powers, right? I mean, but this was actually so well done because
you're talking about the new one.
Yeah, the new one.
Okay, so I started watching it, but even the old one, from the 90s.
Yeah.
So this one's not called Lewis and Clark, is it?
It is.
Lois and Clark, is it?
It is.
Okay.
It absolutely is.
What was the old one called? Oh, the old one was called Smallville. Smallville was the old one.
Oh, Smallville. I remember
Smallville, after they got over the Freak of the Week.
Yes.
So for the first 2 seasons, it's just Freak of the Week.
Yeah, it was Freak of the Week.
Oh, there's a freak this week and a freak that week.
Yeah.
But once they got into season 3 and found, they discovered the fact they could tell a story.
Yeah.
3 through 10 were great. It was wonderful. And so, that's the way I felt that they were doing with Smallville.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to do that with a TV show.
Yes.
And I think that's the psychology difference, like the psychic difference, or whatever the word I'm looking for. I'm a writer. Between writing this long format of television versus the short format of movies. And they think that they have to really focus in on the powers. But when you look at Marvel movies, for the most part. Now you have a few, like Captain Marvel was a garbage movie from start to finish, and the writers of that did the same thing that DC does. They were like, look at Captain Marvel's powers. Isn't her powers amazing? Look, she's a god. She can do anything. Isn't that amazing? Don't
Actually,
you love how amazing she is?
The central problem that I have with Captain Marvel is that there's no character development whatsoever.
No.
She starts as an over-emotional person. She's in the middle as impulsive and over-emotional. And at the end, she beats the end boss as over-emotional and impulsive. And
yeah.
But it's just nothing changes.
So I've got a lot to say about writing strong female characters and how in the last 5 years they have completely gone the wrong direction and ruined women characters in my mind. Yes, as a white male, I have a lot to say about that. However, I don't know if I'm willing to go on record and record my opinions, because even though I'm right, and even though we can definitely go down the path, there's some people that really don't want to hear it, and they will attack you just for saying it. So maybe one day you'll convince me to go down that path, because there's a lot. I mean, and it's sad to me. It's sad to me that these characters that could be so much more than they are not. Wonder Woman in the first movie, Wonder Woman in the second movie, Captain Marvel. Just watched the Suicide Squad, both Harley Quinn, even though it was the best Harley Quinn of all three of them, still missed the mark. But she wasn't the main hero in that story. Ratcatcher 2 was the female protagonist in that story. And cardboard cutout. Yeah. Idris Elba freaking knocked it out of the park with Bloodsport and oh my, or Bloodshot or whatever his name is. Oh my great goodness, what a great character that you wanted to see succeed, and Ratcatcher 2 was just along for the ride and you just didn't care. And to me, that's a disservice. It's a disservice to take those characters. But topic for another time. I definitely want to stray back into the
immersive writing.
Interesting stuff. And maybe one day you can talk me into going on public record of some of these things. Because it is, I do think that it's a shame that that certain aspects of storytelling, and it's across the board, it's movies, it's books, it's everything, have gone in a direction that, in my opinion, actually makes weaker, less interesting female characters and not better and stronger female characters.
I think the mistake that people make in judging female characters is they go like, it has powers, or she has powers, she's the main character, therefore that makes her a strong character. But that's not what makes a strong character. When you remember a character, that is a strong character.
Right.
Like Glenn Cook.
And why do you remember it? You remember it because you relate to them. You relate to them on a personal human level. And when what they're doing right now with their female lead characters doesn't allow you to connect with them. The rules that they put into place are actually forcing you to not care about these characters. And so you don't remember them and you don't care about them. And so you're actually just end up making better male characters. And that seems counterintuitive to your agenda if you're trying to actually increase the coolness of these female characters. You're actually decreasing. But again, that's a great topic, and maybe one day you can convince me to go down that path, because we could talk an entire podcast about that. But just not
let's head back to immersive
head back to the safer waters of world building.
Let's go back to immersive world building and then writing. So
and it really comes down to exactly what you're talking about. It's just thinking about this stuff. It's spinning. We talked over the last couple of podcasts on the difference between plotting and pantsing. But you brought up a great point. If you're in fantasy and you are a pantser, a discovery writer, I won't be. Pantsing is kind of the insulting term, so I'll just use discovery writer. You are that discovery writer. you'd still need to think about it. You still need to spend time plotting the world building, if you want to call it that. And so that you do understand where your terminology comes from, where your words come from. Do you have a timekeeping mechanism? Do you have a communication mechanism? Do you have a medical mechanism? Do you have governments that have, you know, this, that, or the other thing, as far as all the things that make society run? Because we had it, you know, we
like,
had
I am a
sanitation.
pantser. I am a total pantser.
Right.
But I build my world because I know I'm a pantser.
Right.
So I
And I think that's vital in this.
Yeah. You know, to the extent where I have different timekeeping expressions depending on which continent of my world you're on. Because, you know,
because technologies can develop separately from each other over these long distances in a world that doesn't have, you know, the ability to fly from one side of the world to the other in, you know, 8 hours, when it used to take months and months and months to get there. So yeah, it's sorry. So I have a brand new puppy that I just picked up a couple of days ago. He's sleeping on my desk because, you know, he's a brand new puppy. You can't leave him alone, but he's dreaming. So his little feet are doing the little running away. So it distracted me. I'm sorry.
That's so cute.
So yeah, I mean, it's about spending that time and thinking about this stuff. And what does it do? It makes the immersion for the readers a million times more than just going with bloody, or just going with hour, or we're just going with, you know, whatever you're talking about. Anything that you do to push the bounds and make your story feel like it's its own world. And it's the same thing on the writing side. So we started off on the writing side. I'll shift back to that. Anything you can do, like anyone can describe a barrel.
Yeah.
But can you describe the barrel as it impacts the narrator? Now, if it's just a barrel, it's just a barrel. And I'm not saying you have to do like that thing that I did with that backyard. You don't want to write every single piece of description like that. That would be a very heavy, tedious read. But that backyard for that character in that moment of their life is everything. It's past, it's memories, it's joy, it's pain, it's happiness and anguish. And, you know, so I don't want to just describe it as a backyard. I want to describe it with all of the baggage that comes with it. And so, you know,
and the reader experiencing that baggage, because the reader then also gets pieces to relate with. I mean, we all had a childhood, you know.
We've all had happiness and misery.
We've all had happiness. We've all had misery. Like it brings you into the narrator's perspective.
Yeah. It lets you fall deeper inside of that character. And again, whether I read it in third person or whether I read it in first person, there's no difference. No. You are still experiencing that moment with that character, as opposed to just looking at a backyard.
Yeah.
And so both of these things, in my mind, they're not mechanisms. They're not like the mechanics of grammar or the mechanics of world building. It literally is a changing the way you think as a story creator. You know, when you're in the world building, it's not good enough just to go, oh, they have gods, and oh, they have this, and oh, they have that. So like when I'm talking about world building, there's really three things that I like to talk, kind of talk about, because they not only do they tie in together, but they also kind of influence each other. Like each one builds on the other, and they all affect each other. And the three things that I really focus on in my world building class is government, religion, and society. Because the government affects the religion affects government. Both of them affect the society affects those, because the government and religions kind of came, you know, if you go back in time enough, society was there first, and it created the government when you created the religion, or created the religion and created the society, or you know, whatever. So they're all interlinked. And this is all the discussion on how do we make things more immersive. You know, and we have those two sides. We need to think about how to use prose more immersively and immerse the reader into the writing more. But just in world building, it's so important to take that time, and to any, you know, again, even if you're a discovery writer, you need to think about these things. Like, how does my government work? You know, it's important, especially in fantasy. You know, if you're writing other things, whatever, but in fantasy, the characters and the story is going to be impacted on by the government, how everything works.
Well, I mean, characters are, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like the plot is cool and all, and plot twists are fun, but like most stories have been told, you know, at its core, most stories have been told.
I would say.
All stories have been told. So really, it's about your characterization, and your character is the sum of the influences on him as a person. So how do you characterize him if you don't understand the society he comes from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can do some pretty amazing things, and that's where you can get a lot of your thematic elements. So one of the things I use in my classes all the time is this as an example. And this isn't a real story. I mean, anybody can take it if you want, because I just use it in my class as an example. But I say, let's say we have two main characters in this story. And one is just, it comes from our world. So whatever country you're from, whatever, I mean, I'm American. I'm usually speaking to Americans, so I use that. So they come from our world. And in our world, you know, we celebrate Mother's Day. We actually take our mothers out. You know, if our mother calls us and wants us to come over and change a light bulb, we do that. We love our mothers. You know, they have raised us and loved us and cared for us, and so we have that relationship with them. Let's say we have a second character who comes from a world that is all men. You know, in all the towns and everything's men. And how the society works, they have women because they're humans just like us. But women are all locked from birth. They're locked in this area underground, and they stay there. And so they're artificially inseminated. And if the child comes out female, it stays there. And if the child comes out male, they're immediately taken to the surface and given to, you know, some father. You know, then maybe there's a government way to petition that you want a child or whatever, or maybe they're just arbitrarily given. Who knows? That's all in world building. So that's where this character comes from. It's a male character that comes from a world where he's never really even seen a female. He knows they exist. They maybe learn about it in school or whatever. So now let's do this. And one of the reasons why this is a cool idea to think about is when we're dealing with thematic elements, if the themes of the story that we're going to be playing with,
pretty much that would make everybody gay.
Maybe.
I mean, because men and women alike have sexual drives. That doesn't go away.
100%. And I wasn't going there again. This was a different exercise. But you know, that's the thing about taking this and extrapolating. And I didn't even think about that. But well, I mean, but you go back to the Roman times and the army were encouraged to have sex with each other.
Yeah.
Gay is a pretty hard term. Gay means you're, you know, in my mind, and again, this is my definition of it, but gay means you're attracted to the same sex.
Yes.
You can have sex with the same sex without being attracted. I mean, a lot of prisoners have sex with each other and they're not attracted. You just have that need. You got an itch that needs to be scratched.
That's fair. You'd have a lot, but I think you'd also have a lot of male on male relationships, because again, you have a need for romantic relationships, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have women,
me and my best friend here joke all the time that if my wife ever dies, me and him are hooking up.
Yeah.
You know, just because we're so compatible and we spend so much time together. And I've heard stories, I don't know these people, but I've heard stories about people who will buy two houses and it'll be two couples, and the two guys will live in the one house and the two women will live, even though they're married. So like the man's married to the woman, man's married to the woman, and they don't like cross sex or anything. It's not like they're having sex with whoever or whatever.
Yeah.
But they literally live in the two different houses because they feel that they have a higher quality of life living with the other guy and then just dating, you know, basically going out on dates and having sex or whatever with their wife, because they're actually married. They just don't even live in the house with them. And, you know, as a married man of almost 22 years now, you know, there might be some advantageous stuff to that way of thinking.
Like I quite enjoy living with my husband, but we're very,
I do too.
Yeah, we're very but I mean, my point is, like, in a society, yes. Okay, so
so going back to
society
again, that's interesting, and that's a great thought exercise of like extrapolating where this would be. But what I was saying was, one of the things you want to do with your thematic elements is you're looking to exaggerate them, you know, because the more you can, and that's the beautiful thing about fantasy is you can take, you know, if we're going to write a story about the negatives of misogynism, having a character that comes from a world that's all male, Like that's an extreme, and it gives us, and so when you start thinking about character growth and character arc, let's say we now take that character from his world and we drop him into our world. And so this is going to like, what are all these women doing? And maybe there's fear, maybe there's hate, maybe there's whatever. It depends on what we've created for their religion and their society and their government and all of that. So we'd have to figure that out on his side. But just, again, don't worry about all that, because that's not what this thought experiment is about. Let's say we're writing a scene where the two characters have now come together. They're doing whatever. I don't even know what again, I haven't created a story around this, but they're walking down the street and they look down an alleyway, and there's two guys that have cornered a woman, and obviously bad things are about to happen.
Yeah.
Those two characters are going to act on that situation very differently.
Yes.
Maybe the guy from this fictitious world that we created up is like, okay, so I don't care. Whereas the other guys can be like, we got to go do something about this. And he's like, why? Like, I don't understand. And not that he's evil. He literally doesn't understand.
Yes.
And so the character growth, by the end of that story, I'm assuming he's going to understand what he lost by not having a mother. And I mean, that's what these thematic elements are going to allow us to play with. So, that's the thing is when you're world building and when you're thinking, and fantasy opens that up, because you don't really have that if you're just writing a detective story here in modern. I mean, we do have horrible, crappy people that do horrible, crappy things. And we definitely can play on those. Like one that just popped in my head, and this is a little gruesome. In the graphic novel Happy, which they also made a television show out of called Happy, there's nothing happy about this. But it follows this cop, and one of the things, and he's an ex-cop. He's broken. He's a broken man when you meet him. But one of, they do flash back to some of the things that he had to deal with as a cop that broke him. Now, this is a fictitious world, so it's our world, but it's our world on steroids. So it's not a real, it's an exaggerated version of our world. But one of the things that broke him is there was a criminal who had a girlfriend living with him, and he had gone over there all the time because he's beating her and all this stuff. And so domestic, it was one of his regular kind of things. Well, they finally had a baby together. And so he gets called over there for this domestic, violence thing. And he's like, man, I hate going over to this thing. But when he gets there, the guy has put the child in the microwave and cooked it. And so it broke him. It was actually one of the last days, because he ends up killing that guy. The cop murders and doesn't do it nicely. Like he does it in a very painful, he doesn't just shoot him. He literally, he breaks, it breaks him as a human being. And so it's important. And the reason why it's important for that character is so that we understand who he is now. And so these are the things that I'm talking about. You exaggerate, in fiction, not that maybe not have happened, even as disgusting as that even is to think about in the real world. But what I'm saying is that we exaggerate this stuff to show where these characters are, so that in their growth process through the story, because it's about, he's this horrible father in the beginning because he's so broken by the world that he had to deal with, that he doesn't want to be around his daughter, because he thinks that that brokenness will rub off on her. So he's been a horrible father. And now she's, I think, 8 during the story, 7, 8, somewhere around in there. And she gets kidnapped, and he has to do this whole thing. And so it's about him having to grow as a father and understand that just because the world is broken doesn't mean you have to be. And so it's a great story, even though it's dark and really, really violent and gory. It's one of my favorites because it has this great growth for this character. So these are things that I think about. And this is what we're talking about when you're talking about creating a world that's more immersive, because you're actually extrapolating and thinking about this stuff at a way deeper level than is going to show up in the story. Because those are things that need to be thought through so that you can, again, you're probably not going to write the whole history of your candle. I know maybe you did, but you're probably not going to write how they invented it, why they came up with it, and all this other stuff. But you're going to explain enough to know how it works, so that we can use that. And then that gave you some amazingly awesome terms, like a flicker. It lasted only a flicker. Like, that's brilliant. That's awesome. And so being able to do stuff like that is what enhances the story and makes it so much more interesting. And it's the same thing on the prose side, just understanding that everything is personal to them.
And tying that back, like one of the most insightful things that, I don't know if you've said it to me or if I've read it, probably both, but was, you are writing for the reader.
I say that in every class.
Yeah. Because that's like, think about the person who's going to be consuming your content and make it for them. Yeah.
Yeah, to take that a step further, and inevitably this is where it comes from, because I always say I don't write for me, I write for them, I write for the reader. And every time I say that, someone, not a very small percentage, but somebody will go, oh, so you're a sellout. No, I'm my number one fan. Everything I write, I freaking love. 100%. However, it's still not for me. It's always about, how does this affect them? How, and that's what makes me giddy as a story creator. When somebody laughs out loud because they're reading something of mine, somebody cries because they're reading something of mine. I have a letter from a fan who said that she got to this one part in one of my books and she literally flung the book across the room and screamed no.
Yeah.
And she was asking for an apology from me because this happened when she was reading my books at Starbucks. And so she was mortally embarrassed because everybody's like, what's going on? And then she remembered, oh crap, I'm in a public place. So like the writing was so good and it was so immersive and it pulled her in so deep and it freaked her out so much that she had to throw a book and then remember, oh yeah, there's like 30 people around me. I could have hit somebody with that book. Like, that's awesome writing to me. That makes me giddy as a story creator, that I made you forget reality and fall into this world. And so, that's what it means to write immersively. That's what you're going for. But it's about the reader. It's always about them.
And I think that is a great note to end this discussion.
I think so. As always, this has been a lot of fun. I hope everybody got a lot out of it.
If you've enjoyed this episode, you will probably like Marie's YouTube channel, Just in Time Worlds, and Drake's courses on creative writing that he offers through Drake U. So make sure to check those out. If you have any suggestions or comments, please email them to releasingyourinnerdragon@gmail.com, and we will be back next week for another episode.